Welcome everyone to another episode of the Embrace Fertility podcast / YouTube channel. Today we have another fertility expert guest interview. I'm welcoming Sabrina, who's here to talk to us about termination for medical reasons. Welcome to the podcast.
Thank you so much.
So I'm just going to read out your bio to let everyone know who you are and what you do, and then we shall dive in. So, Sabrina is a companion for bereaved parents in the heartbreak of losing a wanted baby to TFMR, which is termination for medical reasons. Through support groups and holistic healing, she walks alongside her community members and helps them to learn to live again from the deep, deep love that they have for their wanted babies and themselves. So welcome today to the podcast. I'm so excited that we managed to find this time together to do this interview because it's such an important topic. And like you say on your website and your Instagram post, if people are supporting people through pregnancy loss, but not discussing TFMR, they're missing a whole sector of the pregnancy loss support. So talk to us a little bit about that and how you got into doing this work.
Yeah, I got into this work because I have been through TFMR myself. So I lost a wanted baby in 2018 and I went looking for support and it's starting to get better. TFMR is being mentioned more and more. But most or many pregnancy loss websites, groups, support groups, they list miscarriage and stillbirth. So I would see miscarriage and stillbirth, miscarriage and stillbirth. And my loss didn't really fit into either of those boxes. Some people who have a TFMR, a termination, or a medical reason in their pregnancy um, later on do also fall into the category of stillbirth as well. But my loss was earlier. It was around 14 weeks. We found out that our baby was sick at one of the ultrasounds, and I just remember the doctor getting very quiet and taking more and more and more and more pictures. It's that quiet that you never want to hear, that quiet that means something is wrong. And then he told us, um, something looks very different with your baby this time compared to the last ultrasound that we had had. And he said, I'm sorry, your baby is very sick. And he explained what he was seeing on the ultrasound, that she was presenting with a lot of swelling all over the whole body, which in fetal health they call hydrops, and it can point to many underlying reasons. We actually still don't know the exact reasons because of the severity of the laws where I am. So I live in Mexico. I'm originally from California, but I've made my life here in this country. And at that time, I mean, it may still be. I think it's still very restrictive in the state where I live. You can really only get an abortion for rape, and that was not my story. This was a wanted baby. So I even thought about saying, okay, it was rape. Can I please have the abortion? But, Naomi, my husband and I lit candles the night that we conceived our baby. We prayed over her soul or her spirit to come to us. I couldn't say that it was rape.
You
I
shouldn't
couldn't.
have to be adding that emotional trauma to an already very traumatic experience, like having to make up a story to fit in with laws that are not set up and don't make allowances for the fact that many people experience this, and there needs to be the medical support, the emotional support, the spiritual support around this. So how did you proceed at that point?
Um, so we did have to travel across state lines into the Mexico City area, the capital state area, and in that state or federal area, um, abortion is allowed with I suppose, no questions asked up to 14 weeks. So our doctor even told us in that appointment, he said, if you decide to carry to term, this is now a high risk pregnancy and I need to see you every week. And if you decide to, he had brought up termination in a very kind way, and I never felt forced either way. But he said, and if you decide to end the pregnancy, you need to decide now. So it was like this arbitrary timeline being placed on us with this baby that we had conceived in love, that we desperately wanted. She was going to be, our second baby. My the her older sibling, my oldest daughter, was 4 at the time, and she would like kiss and hug and sing to my belly. She knew that I was pregnant. It's very heartbreaking.
And I think that's the thing, when it is a second baby as well, it's like considering how you're then sharing with your child or children and allowing them to understand what's happening when there's been pregnancy as loss as well,
Yeah,
that they've got their own grieving to go through. And it's that
yeah,
loss of everyone who knew that you were pregnant. I imagine then having to share that news with others as well was a process that it's like, well, who have we told, and who are the people that now need to be reinformed with what's happening, and how do we explain that? And especially when you didn't have all the answers yourself, I imagine that was
yeah,
so difficult.
yeah, yeah. It was really difficult. Both of our extended families already knew. I was working for myself at the time. I was teaching English. So I don't think any of my clients knew, and I didn't have like a workplace that I had to tell. But even still, yeah, how do you share that news, or share, now we found out the baby is sick, now they're telling us we can't do anything in this state? I really didn't share that much with anyone when we were making that decision, because that decision was so personal, and it really, in the end, it was really up to me. It's a big responsibility, a big burden to carry. Um, but I realize now that the other option was not the life that I wanted for my child. I did not want her to come into this world just to be filled with tubes and needles and maybe survive 5 minutes, maybe survive a few days. Because with this high drops condition, there ends up being swelling in the organs as well, and in the lungs, so the lungs don't develop. So it can be a fatal condition. And then on top of that, there are there are times when babies, when it resolves on its own in pregnancy. It's rare. It's rare, but it happens. So I also have to sit with that I potentially took away her 1 in 1,000, 1 in 1,000,000 chance to survive. But I also took away the 999,999 times where it was not the fate that I wanted for her. It brings up a lot of big topics that we don't really talk about, like quality of life, death, what happens in the uterus, that when we when we conceive, yes, we're bringing a life in. Even if there's a pregnancy loss, there's some sort form of life there, but there will also be a death at some point. And this aspect of TFMR, we really have to hold that directly in our hands and decide the fate. I also had to I had to decide my own fate too. I found out that this condition can affect the pregnant person as well. So I could have had swelling in my organs. They call it mirror syndrome, and it can get so severe that it causes a lot of complications. And the babies that they do deliver, the people who do decide to carry to term, oftentimes they do a very risky, it's not even a C-section, it's called exit strategy. They make a vertical cut and they take the baby out with the placenta. Like it's very traumatic, very, very traumatic, I believe, for both baby and the mother and the pregnant person. And I couldn't put my body through that. I couldn't put her through that. But I hate that part of my story, that I was forced to make such a fast decision, without knowing why, without being able. I didn't even have time to get NIPT testing. There was no time to do CVS or later on amniocentesis. I did ask the doctor, could I have amniocentesis? And he said, well, yes, but then we'll have to wait until around 18 weeks. I was 13. So now I'm over the time. Um, and he said, if you decide to do that, and then if you still go forward with the termination, following the results, you will have to bring your case to an ethics committee. I mean, even just like saying those words,
Just the fact
feeling them
that
coming
there
out of
have
my mouth,
been,
it just
yeah, like people
angers
making,
me.
yeah, making those decisions and going, this is the path that someone will have to walk down, and that it's still being in place because you were making that decision not just for you as a mother of the baby you were pregnant with, but as the mother of your daughter that you already had. So you're never, as a parent, making the decision just for you. You had two children to be considering in that situation, and if you had decided to go forward with the pregnancy, what would that have meant for your older daughter and her life? But having to make all of that decision, what emotional support did you receive at the time?
um some, but it was not appropriate. So we ended up going to an abortion clinic to have what I believe could also be considered a DNC, maybe a D&E at that point, but I didn't get laminaria sticks. And since I already had an older child, and I don't remember if they like looked over my cervix and said, it's okay because you've already had a child. Um, but the emotional support that I had in that place, it wasn't appropriate. There was a counselor, but she just kept saying, um, remember why you're making this decision for you. Remember, like it could have made
As you're
sense
saying that, it's like, oh,
for like a lifestyle abortion,
yeah,
right? Like that sort of prompt could make sense in that case. But I just kept saying, I don't really understand that. Like, that's not my case. And I felt like I was teaching her about my grief, like in the session. It
yeah.
No. And that was it. That was it, really. And I remember sitting in the pre-op chair and thinking, where's my doula? Because I had a doula in my first pregnancy, and I've had a doula in my subsequent pregnancy, and I'm very pro doula, because that emotional spiritual support is priceless. And this is a crucible point that can also be an amazing, transformative, empowering point in a birthing person's life. It's your mothering, it's the mother birth, you're birthing yourself too. So I did not have that experience that day of having someone there with me, even bringing me more Kleenex. I remember the nurses, they would like hand me Kleenex and then just turn around and walk away because they didn't know how to handle me. I wasn't I wasn't their typical client. I wasn't their typical patient. And they really didn't know what was going on. And even when I tried to explain a little bit, to, I think maybe she may have been the receptionist. I don't know, she may have been a nurse as well, receptionist at one point. She took me into a little room and she was like, is somebody forcing you to do that? I'm like, no, that is
Oh,
not what's going on. I'm trying to explain, like, I love this child and I know I have to make this decision, but this is a wanted baby. And like, basically, I was begging for grief support without knowing how to say I need grief
The grief
support.
support, yeah.
Uh-huh. Mhm.
And also having that permission to have those all of those conflicting emotions and hold that in one space, because it sounds like each of the people who were there were trying to put you in a box. It's like, okay, you either
Exactly.
really want this abortion, or someone is forcing you, or you're doing it for your life. It's like, which box do we post her in? And then we go through the motions, and this is the way we deal with people. And because you
Yeah.
didn't fit in any of those boxes, instead of adjusting their language and adjusting the way they was responding to you and trying to learn, they were just like, we could squeeze her into this one instead, like push her. Like,
Yeah, just like make yourself fit in there. I
yeah.
didn't fit in there. Yeah, I've come to believe that it is deeply inappropriate to have TFMR parents at an abortion clinic, and it's also deeply inappropriate for lifestyle abortion patients to be around us as well. It's inappropriate all around because they're very different energies. They're just very different emotional and psychological processes that are going on.
And how did that experience then lead you to doing the work that you're doing today?
Mm. So while I was sitting there saying, "Where's my doula?" also simultaneously I realized this is the work that I've been called to do. And I just knew that I wanted to be in that space. I wanted to be, the continued care, the follow up, the the months or even years afterwards of the grieving and the remembrance and the memorializing and learning to live from that love place, to really feel that this decision was made with so much love, even if the people around me didn't understand or they think that something else is going on. It really felt like a lot of medical gaslighting, and I know that people like throw that term around a lot, but I had to detangle all of that, and that's the support that I wanted to bring to people. Took
And
me a
I think,
couple years because I wanted to go through my process. So I did a lot of different healing, different energy work, working with a postpartum doula myself. She did a closing ritual with me, doing my own rituals, a lot of writing, just different nurturing, caring practices to feel through my grief. And when I felt ready, then I did a program. I haven't completely completed it yet, to be a baby loss family advisor because of everything that happened with the pandemic. It got all screwed up, all completely screwed up. But the doula piece and the grief companioning, I said people need this, and I know that I need this. So if I'm feeling this way, others must be feeling this way. If I am deeply craving community, if I am, having this, it's like bottomless need to share my story. It's like this wellspring of my story and my baby and the love that I have for them. I want to share that with others, and I found other people who were doing that as well. So I found a group called Ending a Wanted Pregnancy. It's a very wonderful Facebook group. They do still exist. And also at that time, Baby Center still had some TFMR forums that were pretty active. I think currently, um, many people have moved over to some TFMR Reddit forums. So there are still spaces like this. And I found my people. I found other people who had been through this. I heard them say, my baby, that we named him such and such. His birthday is coming up. All of those words that I felt like maybe I didn't feel like I wasn't allowed to say them that day at the abortion clinic, but in a way I was, because when I said things like that, I was taken into a little room and I was questioned. So I I wasn't allowed to talk about my grief and my baby because they didn't really understand the psychological process of TFMR. And so I wanted to create these types of spaces for people. And that's how I got into this work.
And I think that's what's so important is, like you said, to find your community, to find other people that you can talk about this who understand. Because if someone loses a child once, once they are here, once they are out of the womb, people can understand that, and they wouldn't expect someone to just, oh, don't talk about it. Just there's communities and services, and there's that support. But it is when it's a pregnancy loss and is a child loss from the womb. But I think so many just categorize that and make that separate. Oh, well, they weren't born yet.
Mm-hmm,
It's
mm-hmm.
like, well, hang on, for 11 weeks of your pregnancy, you would have known you were pregnant and be planning out your life with this child and
In
welcome
accordance
family.
as good parents do.
Yeah,
And then we're called crazy for doing the things that good parents do, like looking into the future, thinking about the due date, planning to move somewhere else, needing to get maternity leave, et cetera, et cetera. All of the changes that a child brings into, a family, and the family dynamic will shift. And my family dynamic has shifted because of this child. So that didn't go away. Their due date was still a date that, I had dreamed and planned for. It was a very hard day. But it was unrecognized. It's like, oh, well, that it wasn't meant to be. And that's a really hard one for TFMR because I consciously made a decision. I said, this pregnancy cannot continue in this way because of these illnesses, because of these conditions that are presenting. But I could have made a different choice, and maybe possibly, it could have been, so it wasn't meant to be. That's a very tough one.
yeah. And I think that's the thing when it's and again it like creates that segregation in like pregnancy loss support groups. I imagine that if you're sat side by side with someone who has where they have miscarried, and the language, the decision made, like the decision was taken from them. So a big part of the
Mm-hmm.
grief there is the fact that they had no control and it was a
Yeah,
complete shock. And you've got the
yeah.
same elements here, but there's the whole like adding into that of like having to make a decision, and especially with your situation of having that time limit and dealing with the legalities um
Mm-hmm.
of happening around that as well is huge. And so obviously, and sometimes people are dealing with that um as well, but generally like getting the aftercare for a miscarriage. But if the actual decision has been made by nature, by their body, it's such a different situation.
Yeah, the typical things that um and we're all allowed to find our own meaning, like the meaning making in any type of pregnancy loss. But some of the typical things that people may say, you know, oh, maybe it was for the best. I don't know that in my situation. Or, oh, most miscarriages are for, people say this, that it's for a genetic condition. And I thought, well, my baby was still alive, and perhaps there was a genetic condition, and I wasn't even allowed to find out what. So,
Yeah,
and then if you find out what it is, then what do you do with that information? So, yeah, very different paths and yet similarities. I do like to say that TFMR parents belong in the broad pregnancy loss space. We belong there as well. And at the same time, we may feel best in TFMR only spaces so that we can talk about all of these complexities of it needing to be a decision that's feels like no decision.
And you have a 4-part framework of the way that you work. I would love for you to share what that framework is and why you've decided on each of those elements being key for the support that you offer.
Yeah, so we were talking about living from the love, you know, remembering the love that we have for this child. Because when I live from that place, then all of the misunderstandings that happened that day in the abortion clinic, all of the awful things that people can say about baby loss in general or grief. I mean, there's so many misconceptions about grief and loss and baby loss. And then on top of it, there's, this negative diatribe. A small percentage of people have very negative thoughts about abortion, but I let all of that fall aside when I remember these key pieces. So the first one, and this spells out seen, which is important. So it's SEEN, because what I wanted that day was to be seen as a mother. What I wanted that day was to be seen as a grieving mother. What I wanted that day was for my child's dignity to be seen, for all of those things to happen. Um, so I have this 4-part, like living from the love, um, loving ourselves again. It's very hard to make this decision and then not self-shame. So the first one, S, stands for story. So your story is important, and it's important to find places where you can share your story. And in my grief circles, I also share archetypal, like, goddess and death and underworld stories, so that we can feel that thread that actually you're not alone in this. We have been trying to understand death and this liminal pregnancy loss, or fertility, infertility, all of those stories that they can be thousands, millennia old. People have been wrestling with this story for as long as we could write and speak.
That's so beautiful, like when you said earlier about like tuning in with the love. And I know a lot of your posts as well, and you refer back to this, and that's such a beautiful, because love is so expansive and grief is so contracting. And so it was as well bringing love to yourself, to the situation, to others around you, rather than switching in and like contracting everything down. Like bringing love to it just feels like it starts to soften and expand, and can sort of bring you back. Like it feels like, for me, it feels like kind of like going, so like into that fetal position of like curling up. But when you think about love, it's like
Yeah,
expansion.
yeah, yeah. And it's all part of the cycles. We really have to, like, tune in and really go into the grief so that we can then rise again. And that comes to the next piece. The first E, is education. So I really like to include, helping my clients and helping my community members learn about the grief process. That you're not crazy for wanting to, like, deeply cocoon and just go inside, or like cry for however many days or weeks, or or even on milestone days or tough days or out of the blue for however long. This is part of grief, and we were never taught how to grieve. We don't talk about it a lot in society. We don't know what the typical physiological sensations of grief are. So I encourage my clients to read about grief. I mean, you can also learn through story as well. So they're all interrelated. When you read and talk to others and hear other people's stories of their own grief, then you start to say, oh yeah, me too. Oh, okay, I'm not crazy, I'm grieving.
And having that space, I think, because there's not like a recognized, again, if you lose a family member,
Mm-hmm.
there's
Mm-hmm.
society allots you, and a lot of the time it's not a long enough amount of time, but they kind of
Yeah,
allot
not enough.
you,
But
like,
yeah, but
oh,
it's more visible.
been,
Mm-hmm.
oh, it has been 6 months now. Are you still grieving? And then seems to,
Still.
yeah, it's like, but at least there's some kind of marker and some kind of allowance to start with. Whereas it feels with pregnancy loss that there just isn't any, or it's like a week. Like I've had clients literally like go back to work after a week, and people have been like, oh, why are you looking so sad? And they're like, why, I sent an email saying like what's been going on, and they're like, all right, that was like last week. And it's just like, oh,
Wow.
no, there's no space. This is it. And there's no language as well, I feel, in
Mm-hmm.
around pregnancy loss. People don't really
Mm-hmm.
understand. And I suppose it depends on people's own personal views of
Mm-hmm.
when does that embryo become a fetus, become a baby, become a person. And if they're saying like, oh, this isn't a child until they're physically here. But then if someone had a
Mm-hmm.
very, very late pregnancy loss, there'd be more allowance for grief. But I think part of that is because it's so visual. Someone is visually pregnant and then they're not pregnant anymore. And so people around them have to deal with that. Whereas when someone doesn't look pregnant, when it's an early loss and they haven't
Mm-hmm.
physically, they've changed physically a huge amount internally, but
Oh yeah.
externally they look the same to others. I think that is part of it as well. And the fact that we don't generally share publicly about pregnancies until 12 weeks as well, which is kind of this
Yeah.
flawed sensibility. People are like, oh, I won't share in case I have a loss and then I'm grieving and then I don't have any support because I haven't told anyone.
Oh, so tough.
Yeah.
Yeah, the lack of language, the lack of visible loss. It is true. The lack of, I mean, I remember I went looking for grief resources, and they were for, like grieving your mother or grieving your adult sibling or grieving your friend or grieving your spouse. And a lot of the tips were go through all your old photos and think about all the memories and call up all their friends and ask them to share a memory. Like, who, what, how could I do any of those things with my pregnancy loss? It was me. I was the main memory keeper of the whole thing. So
Well,
who and what pictures?
yeah. And you're
I mean, some
grieving
people do get pictures in later pregnancy losses, but not everyone.
and it's as well, it's like those, you're grieving the future that you thought you were going to have, so the
Yeah.
memories you imagined you were going to have. It's like, oh, the due date's here, and so my older daughter is going to be like, 4 or 5, she's going to be this old, she's going to be
Yeah.
this big, and then they're going to be born, and then when she's 1 and she's this, and you've had all those thoughts, you've planned out your life, or you've visualized, you've thought about all these different situations, and now it's the fact that they're not going to happen. And so you're grieving things that haven't happened yet, but our mind obviously doesn't know the difference between real and imagined, so you still feel the loss of that experience that you were anticipating.
Yeah. Yeah. And we anticipate it because we love our babies. When we see 2 lines, we already love them. When we find out we're pregnant, we already love them.
Yeah.
And of course, the mind extrapolates as a good parent would, because, yeah, I mean, it would be great to start a savings account, to start their college fund when you see two
Yeah.
lines, or to, build a bigger house when you see 2 lines, because that's your love visible for that child.
Yeah.
Hmm. But then we're called crazy for like thinking about how old they could have been. Like, no, it's not crazy. It's love. I
Yeah.
know that my child would have entered kindergarten this year.
Yeah.
I know that in my bones.
And it's
It was
also,
a tough back to school season for me.
yeah, because you're measuring all the women who are pregnant around the time that you were pregnant and having babies
Yeah.
around the time that you should have been having your baby. Their little people are then the markers of that you're measuring. It's like, oh, I wonder if my daughter would have lost her first tooth by now. I wonder if she would, and it's that.
Yeah.
But again,
Yeah.
there's no space for this in our society, because when you do then have these conversations, the people are kind of like, oh, uncomfortable. But it's so natural, and I think every woman who has lost a baby at whatever stage will have done that maths and gone, oh, they'll be
Yeah.
so big and there'd be this, and
Yeah.
because it's so natural, you can't not do it. You don't have the conscious thought. It's like, oh, I'll work out how old they'll be. It just pops in you just know it's
Yeah. Yep. Grief math for
yeah.
sure.
Grief map, yeah.
Grief math. Well, and that brings us to the next E. So to counter this uh cultural thread of like no having no space and people don't know what to say, the next E is for you in this space. It's expression. So it's your own expression of the love you have for your baby. And there's a myriad ways to express this love. It could be through thinking about them and dedicating a walk, and you just go for a walk. um so many. Maybe there's a color that you associate with your baby. Maybe you like to do a little bit of gentle mindfulness, grief informed, trauma informed, of course. Maybe you like to draw, maybe you like to garden, maybe you want to, plant a bush in their honor or a tree. All of those different things are so very important so that we can have the space and time that this love is asking, because the grief comes from love, not the other way around. And when I first heard that, when I was early in grief, I didn't understand it. It took me like 2 or 3 years to understand that concept. So if you're in the place where you don't understand that yet, that's okay. It's okay to be in that confused, not understanding place, and look for the different ways to express your grief and the love, lighting a candle, so many different ways. Joining a group, talking about your baby, right? It overlaps the story again, but it's all one and the same.
And having that space and having that permission that there's no time limit as well on when you can do that. So it's not like, oh, you can express yourself for 6 months and then pack it away in a box and just look
Pack
at
it away.
like it's like the expression that is ongoing, and it may change over time, and the way you want to express yourself may change over time, but there's no deadline of when you need to be like done with the grieving, done with the expressing yourself here. It's like that permission just to any emotion that we don't express, that we don't feel and experience, gets held inside and is looking for
It's
a
gonna
way
pop
to
up
be.
somewhere else. Yeah.
Yeah, it's
Yeah.
gonna come out. You can't swallow things down, and like they have to come out somewhere. It's gonna
Mm.
happen. And so embracing all of the emotions, and maybe there's different ways that you express in different ways. So yeah, we use art therapy quite a lot in the Embrace Fertility Method, and we did a group call the other
Yeah, wonderful.
and so I was like, so when everyone joins a little gift box, and in there's some watercolor paints. And I said, right, we're just gonna sit down on the call, and I want everyone to just grab a piece of paper, and I want you to paint a representation of something that you want to release, something that you want to be free of. It can be big, it can be small, but just create a representation of it just for you. And then we did emotional freedom technique tapping while looking at the
Oh, wonderful. Wonderful. Yeah.
and
Yeah.
then
That yeah, that definitely falls under expression, all the body work things. Yeah.
like just a way to get out, because sometimes you can't verbalize what it is. You don't even know what it is that you want to be free of. I want to be free of the
Yeah.
you can't even like
Yeah.
say it, but you could do a big
Yeah.
squiggly blob on a page and be like that.
Uh-huh.
that, please. And so inviting lots of different ways, maybe like, because people are, oh, I'm not creative, I'm not an artist. It's not a picture to keep. It's not, it's a way to express. It's like writing or speaking or moving your body. It's just
Mm-hmm,
a way to express.
mm-hmm, mm-hmm. All of those, all of those. And the last part of the scene framework is starts with an N, and it overlaps with the expression as well. It's nurture. So we're nurturing ourselves, and it can be very hard. It can be very, very hard to do self-care when you feel like your body has failed you, because a lot of self-care things, it's around the body. I mean, you can do self-care for the mind and for your spirit as well, but many things do involve the body, and that can feel so very hard if you think, well, was it my egg that was faulty? Do we carry something in our genes that means that we, our baby was sick, or me, maybe the condition that made it impossible for the pregnancy to continue was some condition that you carry, and it can be very, very hard. So nurture. I like nurture even more than self-care, because it's about being very gentle, moving very, very gently into these different practices. It could be, all right, I'm gonna have half a glass of water, and I'm gonna do it because I'm my baby's mother. So it's nurturing you. It's nurturing their memory. And I have a free download on my website. I have a self-care guide in the grief of TFMR. So it has some very gentle practices in there that you can try out. Nurture also encompasses nurturing the continued connection and bond that you have with your baby. So that can look like um, maybe having a candle with a candle holder with their name on it. Or maybe there's an animal that you associate with your baby, and when you see like that stuffed animal in the store, you're just scrolling and there's like a random picture of that animal. You think, oh, okay, that's my baby saying hello. And nurturing those connections, nurturing yourself, and also remembering to go very gently, because it can be very hard.
And I think it's so beautiful what you said, that using that word nurture instead of self-care, because I think so many people go, oh, self-care, have a bath. And you're kind of like, well, we kind of want to spread the net a little bit further than that. But I think sometimes people get a bit confused with like self-care and like basic sort of hygiene and looking after yourself as
Uh-huh.
feed yourself, get enough sleep, hydrate yourself, clean your body. That's like, I think sometimes people are so busy and so wrapped up in life, they then class that it's like, well, I had a shower and washed my hair, self-care, tick. And you're like, well, that's self-preservation. That's the sort of basics
Mm-hmm.
of hygiene and looking after yourself. And a lot of the time, some of us are really bad at doing that, especially with the hydration and the food. And I say, like,
Mm-hmm.
nurturing your body through nutrition, really important. But then it's like this other thing of how can you give yourself more, embracing like
Mm-hmm.
nurturing and nourishing. So a big thing I talk about is um when you're a mother, and I believe that we step into motherhood as soon as we decide we want to become a mother. So I don't count mother
Mm-hmm.
starting as when a baby is born, because if you're making decisions in your life about
Mm-hmm.
the future of this other person joining you, you are
Yeah.
parenting. You're
Oh,
parenting
yeah.
already. And so especially in this scenario, you're making decisions for that child and with that
Yeah.
child's health and benefit. So you are a mother. And so mothering the mother, nurturing,
Mm-hmm.
nourishing, doing all you can to support, and not just your body as well, because sometimes when you're recovering from miscarriage
Mm-hmm.
or loss, you need to be really
Mm-hmm.
supporting your body to heal,
Yeah.
and the body may heal quicker than the emotional and spiritual nurturing needs to continue a lot. I think that's also, we
Mm-hmm.
put so much weight as a society on on physicality. So if someone breaks their leg and we can see a plaster and it takes however many months for their leg to heal, and then they need physio to help build up their strength. And so we may not, we might not ask that person to go for a run with us for a good, I don't know, 6 months, a year, and total have that allowance of, oh, well, you did break your leg at the start of the year. Whereas imagine someone might get invited to, say, a baby shower 3 months of loss, and we don't go, oh, I'm not going to ask you to do that because of that. We're just like, do you see what I mean? It's a bit of a weird analogy, but again, like, we can see that physicality and we make allowances for it, whereas we don't allow for the emotional.
Yeah, and the place of the healing, it's in such a hidden spot. So even where the wound from where the placenta was, it's hidden. But I like to remind my clients who are very early out, they're like, oh, I don't know about exercise or whatever. And I say, if you had a wound this size, like the size of half of your face, would you be going out running? Probably not. You would need to heal that wound. That's the size of the wound, but it's inside of you. And then on top of that's the emotional wound in the womb. And our hearts and souls. So it's a lot. It's a lot that needs nurturing. And it can also at the same time bring up the guilt and the self shame that's around having to have made this decision, or something went wrong with my body. So do I deserve to be nice to my body? Do I deserve to be nice to me? It's very, very, very tender. That's why I say go very gently.
And how do you support people? So you have your framework, the SEAM framework. How can you support people? What does that look like?
Some people are very private and they want one-on-one support. So I do offer that. I have just like 2 or 3 spots a month, because we can meet, once a week to really look at, all the ways that you're working with your story, any more grief education you need, your own expressions, how you're nurturing yourself, looking at your self-care plan in grief is a big part of the one-on-one work that I do. But people in this situation really like to be with others who have been through it. So I do have one-on-one, but I really focus on my groups. So I have TFMR grief circles. I call that program Ascend because of the underworld, going deep down into the grief and this intimate connection with death that we have through this experience. So the descent is part of it, but we also ascend, or we're aspiring to. We're aspiring to live again. And yeah, so I have those grief circles. I open those up quarterly. The next ones will be starting in early February 2024. And I also have a free Facebook group that is called the TFMR Support Circle. There's almost 700 people in there.
Wow.
So you're not alone, not alone. And yeah, we're posting in there every day, my anniversary is coming up, or I got this commemorative tattoo, or how do you deal when people ask at work and you don't really want to talk about it at work? How do you deal? All those questions come up. So the Facebook group is a really great place for that. I'm also on Instagram. There's a good community there, although it's a little bit more anonymous, but sometimes we need that. Sometimes we need more anonymous support in this because some people it's illegal in their country, or it is illegal in their state. Like their husband could literally get arrested for having driven them to another state.
Yeah.
So if you need more anonymous support too, I have those spaces, or make up an alias on Facebook and join us there. So
Yeah. Fantastic. I'm going to share all of the all of your links on the blog and in the show notes. So wherever you are watching this below, you should be able to find all of the information so you can connect with Sabrina and take her up on these amazing offerings of support if you need them. And thank you so much for coming on today and being so open and honest and sharing your story with us and sharing the amazing work that you do. Thank you.
Thank you. Oh, one more thing. I also have a podcast. I forget to
Oh,
mention it. So it's
fantastic.
our TFMR stories. So sometimes it's me talking about my story. Sometimes I bring on other parents. Sometimes I bring on other grief professionals in the field. So you can, listen in on those conversations as well. I guess that would be another anonymous way to
Yeah,
participate in the community.
and that's so lovely as well for maybe people who don't feel ready yet to join, don't want to join the Facebook group, and if that feels too exposing, but they can still have that connection and learning through the stories of others. So fantastic. I will link to that as well. And you were telling us about some free gifts that you have on your website. Could you just remind us what they are that people can go and access and just download anonymously and get that support that way?
Yeah, so there's the self-care guide. I definitely recommend that. I have a tab on my website. I believe it's resources, and all of my different free downloads and guides are in there. I have journaling prompts. I have art prompts. I have some different free workshops. So they're all in the resources tab. But I would definitely say get the self-care guide. That one's really good.
Fantastic. And if there's one last thing that you'd like to share with our listeners, what would it be?
I would say that if you have been through this, I know that it feels so incredibly lonely. It is very lonely and it's a very isolating experience. But it doesn't have to be lonely. Your your own grief journey, it will always be solitary. It will be your own, but you don't have to do it alone. So come and find us in the TFMR community. If my space isn't quite right, there are other TFMR support groups too, and I share them on my website as well. So keep looking for the best space for you, because more and more are cropping up, and we're working behind the scenes to have more different resources for TFMR.
Fantastic. Thank you so much for coming on today. And yeah, really look
You.
forward to sharing this with my listeners. Thank you. If you'd enjoyed this episode, then please do let us know. We're both on Instagram. You can come and drop us a message and just continue the conversation after this episode. If you don't yet follow the Embrace Fertility podcast, just hit subscribe to be the first to know when a new episode goes live. And if you're not yet on my mailing list, come and sign up at embracefertility.co.uk for 3 ways to stress less while trying to conceive. I'm also running a free class. No, I'm not, because it will be coming out the week after. Hold on. You can also catch up with the replay of my latest free class, Surviving the Holidays, in which I share cognitive behavioral techniques for dealing with the fact that this time of year may not look and feel how you expected it to look, emotional freedom techniques to bring comfort to your mind and body, and festive comebacks to that dreaded question, when are you going to have a baby, another baby, or what's happening with your pregnancy? You can check that out at embracefertility.co.uk, and the replay will be available until the new year. Thank you, everybody.